getting back into it as I took a little interlude with my feeling sad about my dad. But hey, Dad, I know he listens. Love you. I want to dive into a book I recently read, and it's called Strangers, a Memoir on Marriage. It's by Belle Burden. Wow. This book. Wow. That's all I can say. I read it in 2 days. I ate this book up. And PSA, there's going to be spoilers in this section because I'm going to talk about the central premise of this book. But I think that even if you know what the book's about, it's still amazing. I mean, it's a memoir. So if it's not like she's a super public figure, but a lot of these things are public knowledge. Anyways, let's dive in. So the author Belle was from a very privileged, classic New York, old money family. It really reminded me of like the Kennedys in a way. Her mother was a highly successful urban planner, and she was a civic leader in New York City. And her father was a Vanderbilt descendant, and he was a well-known financier and politician. And he also owned and published The Village Voice, iconic publication in New York City, for those that know the history of New York. Her parents, when they were together, were apparently very much considered the glamorous it couple of the 60s and 70s in Manhattan. And on top of that, Belle's grandmother was this legendary socialite and fashion icon, and her name was Babe Paley. So she came from this very known, long, rich history New York family and was raised in Manhattan. And early on in her career as a lawyer, she met her husband, James. That is not his real name. It is the name that's used in the book. Strangers, a Memoir on Marriage is Belle sharing the story of her divorce to James and the collapse of her marriage. You're taken into the inner workings of her mind and the absolute destruction that this divorce caused in her life. I think what struck me the most with this book is how heartless and cold her ex-husband is. One day, Belle gets a call from an unknown number in the early days of COVID. I think it was March. And they're at their house in Martha's Vineyard. She doesn't pick up this phone, and instead it rings again. And eventually the person leaves a voicemail. The voicemail says, "I'm trying to reach Belle. I'm sorry to tell you this, but your husband is having an affair with my wife." Her heart stops, but she trusts that James must have an answer. And when she confronts him, he does. He says it only lasted a month. He was so sorry. He still loved her. It meant nothing. He was very emphatic about her being the priority, and he wanted to be with her, and this was over. So you think, okay, maybe this story is going to be them working through what this is. The next morning, early in the morning, she wakes up to find James packed with a bag, and she explains how he had this expression on his face that she had never seen before. They were married 20 years. She'd never seen this expression. He looked entirely different from how he looked the night before. She said she knew before he even spoke that something had changed. And he said to her, "I've decided I want a divorce. I'm leaving. You'll be fine. You're still young." He shared that he thought he was happy, but he wasn't. And I quote, "I thought I was happy, but I'm not. I thought I wanted our life, but I don't. You can have the house and the apartment. You can have custody of the kids. I don't want it. I don't want any of it." God, brutal. Absolutely brutal. Imagine that. They were married 20 years. I just can't imagine the night before he's telling you 1 month thing, it will never happen again. And then you wake up to him literally abandoning your entire life and kids, saying he doesn't want them during a global pandemic. They had 3 kids. Their youngest daughter was 12. The middle one was 15. And the oldest son was, I think, 17. But what type of like headspace do you have to be in to truly just say, I don't want it. I don't want the kids. It was just so wild to me. And this is within the first 6 pages. And my mouth was dropped. Literally, it just kept dropping. I could not. I'm on the beach reading it over July 4th weekend. And I was like, Jeffrey's like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "This book is crazy." So the book just kicks off with a bomb. And from there, she takes you through the process of loss and her trying to grapple and understand. One, where did her husband go? The man she spent the last 20 years with and fell in love with, who they seemingly had a very happy relationship. And 2, why did he leave? Why? There was no explanation. So as I mentioned, keep in mind, this is March 2020, right at the start of COVID. So he doesn't just leave her, he leaves her in isolation with 3 children, no access to him, and no explanation. He becomes almost completely unreachable after this. His family cuts her off, and she's trying to process the collapse of her marriage while also protecting her children from the pain of what actually happened and not wanting to shit talk their father for them to have a relationship with him. And what makes, the book so devastating is that Belle not only writes about the divorce, but she moves back and forth between present day and the destruction and then the life that they had before from when they met and what they've built together, as well as her own kind of upbringing with her parents. But she shares the warmth and the coziness and this New York world, the summers in Martha's Vineyard, the version of this marriage that just felt so beautiful and safe. And it has that very old New York American family myth, that kind of cozy quality to it, which somehow just like makes the abandonment feel even colder. So as a reader, you're not just watching a woman lose her husband, you're watching her try to understand how the life that she thought she was living has just disappeared overnight. And one of the most devastating parts of the book is watching Belle realize how much power she had given away inside this marriage. So you find out that their prenup said that anything in their individual names stayed individual, and anything in both of their names would be split. And this was something that he requested they add to the prenup. It wasn't something that was in her family prenup. Most families of this wealth have a prenup they all use. He asked to add this stipulation. And because she believes they were building a life with her partner, she was the one who used the money from her trust fund to buy their Manhattan apartment and the Martha Vineyard house. Must be nice guys, honestly. Anyways, no, I don't want this at all. But sounds lovely to have those 2 properties. But she used her trust fund to buy those homes. And she put them in both of their names, albeit it was all her own money, which emotionally makes sense. I probably would have done the same. It's our life. We're building things together. We're each contributing in different ways. This is your person. You're married. You're building a family and a life together. But when the divorce happens, he tries to claim half of those homes. And she discovers that he had been amassing really this enormous fortune in his own name for years from working in finance. So the money she had brought in had become theirs, but the money he had built had remained his. He kept all his assets in his name. What a piece of fucking shit. I was like so floored by that. And I fucking hate this sentiment when you hear divorces of being like, well, I'm the one that worked, because she ended up being a stay-at-home mom. She quit her job and stopped working. But you cannot equate the two. Like, why is it that money is valued, but the woman staying home, working for the family, there's not monetary value to that? There should be, because she literally raised your children, kept your home afloat, cooked for you, cleaned for you, so you could just go to your job and not have to do anything else. That must be so fucking nice, not having to actually deal with your own life and having a wife who's like essentially your slave. Sorry, guys. It's the Fair Play book. If you want to go listen to a podcast episode, Fair Play by Eve Rodsky goes into this type of dynamic, because it's not okay to have all the distribution of labor for the home put on the wife. So it's just sick. And then on top of it, after saying she can have the house and the apartment, he tries to get half. And for her to be even able to give him, like pay him out, she would have to have sold both properties. So all of that just made my stomach drop, because this woman who had once been this corporate attorney is suddenly in this like powerhouse. She's suddenly looking at her life and realizing how much financial power she had handed over in the name of love and trust. And this story is not an individual story. We all do it. And not we all do it, but it's a very common story. And I think what I found really powerful is that she decides to fight back, because she said she knew her ex-husband probably thought she never would. And she didn't do it just for the house or the apartment, but she did it for her children, for her self-worth, and and for the part of herself that she needed to remember that she wasn't powerless. And they eventually settle right before they're actually due in court, and she's able to keep the homes and he keeps his fortune he had built, and she takes full responsibility of the children. He had zero requests to have any type of custody, not even like weekends or holidays, literally nothing. So she took full custody. And as mentioned, these are not adult children. So yes, the legal details are crazy, but what stayed with me was Belle's acceptance at the end and how she kind of moved through all of this with such grace. I feel like she did collapse, but she continued to pull herself up for her children and had some really wonderful friends and female friends and male friends that kind of stepped in and really held her and said to her, this is wrong. What has happened to you is wrong. And I think sometimes when you're in a situation like this, where you're cut off from any form of explanation, you don't want people to fix it. You want to hear that it is wrong, because I can imagine you'd start to go a little crazy being like, did I do something wrong? Like, am I the one, like, am I crazy? And he's just left me because of that. But having people just outrightly say, this is not okay, but you're going to get through it. And what was really actually beautiful was she found her way back to writing through this experience. She'd always been a writer. And when she was younger, in college, she was in this writing class. And I guess someone commented or gave feedback that her writing was bad. And it really scarred her. And I can relate to that. I had my own scars with acting because of feedback I got when I was younger. And she never returned to writing after that until she went through this process. And I think she was writing kind of cathartically and then decided she wanted to submit her story to Modern Love, the New York Times column. And eventually it was published. And the Modern Love segment is what led to her writing her full story in her memoir that has now been optioned for a film, I believe, that is going to star Gwyneth Paltrow. So read it before the film comes out. But honestly, the biggest takeaway is looking back, she realized that there was a pattern in her family, in the women of her family, women who've been cheated on and divorced and discarded. And she realized that she needed to break the pattern. And this is all about generational trauma. And that, I don't know, some of you may know about generational trauma, others don't. I will give a high-level overview. That there's a theory of trauma that is carried through your lineage. It's also ancestral trauma. So things that have happened to your ancestors that continue to happen with the next generation until it is broken, until someone decides to break it. And she found that this was trauma that has been passed down the female line of this divorced, cheating, discarding, men leaving their wives. And she felt like her telling this story, finally telling this story, the story of a memoir on marriage about her divorce and her husband cheating and leaving her, was her taking her power back and breaking the cycle for her children. And they would look back and be so proud of their mother for sharing her side and her words, because her whole story was taken from her when he walked out that door and gave her no place to speak. I couldn't put it down. It's so powerful. You feel it through the pages. I loved it. And I think this is just why people tell vulnerable stories. And it made me remember why I tell vulnerable stories on the podcast, because it makes people feel less alone. The amount of comments she said she got from people who've gone through a similar thing, who've gone through the divorce and have been left alone and discarded, and the women in her family who all said to her they were nervous about her sharing her story. They didn't want her to publish it. But when she did, they all said how cathartic this was and that they healed from her sharing it too. How beautiful is that? Because she fucking broke the cycle. I have my own cycle in my family that I'm working on to break. And I'll talk about it in another podcast because generational trauma is so interesting. And I probably want to get a little more info from my therapist before I dive into it. But there's some really interesting, what am I trying to say? Information around generational trauma. But truly, this woman, I thought it was a choice to read it after getting engaged, because I was sharing it with Jeffrey and I was going and kind of looking at him and being like, are you going to wake up one day and be a different person? I think So psycho. But what was really helpful for Belle to explain that is that people kept asking her, like, were there any red flags and signs? And I thought it was actually really beautiful because she shared in a way that, waking up one day and him just pivoting like this was actually better than her marriage falling apart over years because it didn't destroy any of the 20 years of happy memories they had. And they had this joyful marriage with their family. She said she would have rather him change his mind like that immediately than it be years of it falling apart and it damages the kids. And it's just this awful 3 years where you do forget about the previous happy memories. But she did say one thing, and she said that, upon reflection, and I think it was she hinted at it. I don't know if she ever really directly said this, but this was my takeaway, is that he always had this side of him, her ex-husband, that he never shared. It was almost like there was this kind of glass wall between them. And I think you kind of start to learn that maybe it stemmed from his own childhood and he had a lot of emotional trauma held in. And we've seen this story play out time and time again where a man goes through a midlife crisis. And why do these midlife crises happen for these men? I think it's because they're not dealing with a lot of the emotional turmoil that every single one of us have. And as women, it's not just going to therapy. Everyone should go to therapy, but I also think women talk more about their feelings to one another. So even if you're not in therapy, you're still having a cathartic release because you're talking to your friends about how your emotional inner world. I don't believe men do that as much. So I think men start to feel very alone and feel this need to be like, I just need to change something or do something drastic to kind of get maybe away from the feelings that are starting to come up. That was kind of my thought process, as if he never really expressed himself. And that's why, back to my question of, are you just going to wake up one day and be a different person to Jeffrey? Is he's not like that. And I love that about him. He has his own, insecurities with sharing things, but he goes to therapy. We go to therapy together and he's gotten so much better at sharing his emotions. And I love that because I don't think it would ever happen where he'd wake up one day and be a different person because we talk so much about how we're feeling. So honestly, I encourage you to read the book. Even if you're married, if you're not married, if you're single, whatever, I think it's just a really fascinating memoir. And I've just been so obsessed with memoirs recently, generally. I really hope she writes something else. And her writing is incredible. It's heartbreaking, but inspiring and empowering. And I think as women, we always need empowering stories.